Well, good morning to everyone joining us from the United States. Good afternoon to folks in Europe, and welcome to everyone, regardless of where you are, for this webinar. I'm Jeff Rathke, president of the American-German Institute, and we are delighted to offer today's event, which is a presentation of research conducted in the context of our visiting fellowship, which we do in partnership with the German Academic Exchange Service. So this is the first of our of this year's crop of DAAD visiting fellows to present her research, and I'm going to let my colleague, Dr. Eric Langenbacher, who is the director of our program on society, culture, and politics, take things over from here and introduce our speaker and then lead us through the conversation. So, Eric, let me hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jeff. It really is my great pleasure to introduce our speaker today. The topic of today's webinar is called Catholic Responses to Recent Developments in Migration Policy in the United States and Germany. And our speaker is Kathrin Ritzka, who's a doctoral researcher and research associate in Catholic theology at Humboldt University, Berlin, and coordinator of the Center for Interreligious Theology and Religious Study at the same university. She holds a master's degree in German literature from Humboldt, an MPhil in theology, religion, and philosophy of religion from the University of Cambridge, and a bachelor's degree with a double major in Catholic theology and German literature. She's currently quite busy co-editing volumes on religion and modernity, which will come out in 2026, and on language and theology, as well as finishing her doctoral thesis on the notion of consolation in theology and contemporary literature. Kathrin, it's really great to welcome you this morning.
Well, thank you for the kind introduction, Eric, and thanks for having me here. Thanks to the German Academic Exchange Service and also to the AGI for the wonderful opportunity to spend 3 months here in Washington, D.C. So today, as Eric already said, I will present my interim results of my time here. And doing that, I will share my PowerPoint presentation with you. I hope you can now all see it. So the topic of my talk is Catholic responses to recent developments in migration policy in the United States and in Germany. And I'm doing that behind the background that while migration has always been a controversial issue and there is no constant in the political or public discourse, the discourse is shifting in both countries, in the United States and in Germany, towards a more negative position on migration for economical reasons, because of the globalization. And my very basic interest is to find out how Catholics are reacting to these changes. And before I start by presenting my findings, I want to focus with my two background parts on the question why Catholics are an interesting group to look at. And first, I want to look at the numbers in the United States and in Germany to get a bit of a feeling what kind of group we're talking about. And I also want to just briefly say some things about the history of the Catholic Church and migration. Then I want to, because a lot has happened in the last week, actually, I want to draw attention to some key debates in 2025, because here I will only focus on the present time. And then I will focus more on some key issues and talking points that are shaping the debate from my point of view before finishing my talk with some takeaways. So, Catholics in numbers. In the United States, there have been 62 million Roman Catholics in 2020. The number is increasing, which is interesting. And that is 20% of the adult population. So it's the second largest religious group after Protestantism. And if you only count the denomination itself, it's the single largest group. 29% of US Catholics are immigrants, and 14% are children of immigrants. So this is just to give you like a quick idea about Catholicism in the United States. Then with regard to Germany, 24% of Germans are Roman Catholic. That's probably also something I should mention. When I'm talking about Catholics, I'm talking about Roman Catholics. There are other Catholic groups, of course. Followed by the Protestant Church, where there are 21% of the general population in Germany. And in Germany, the so-called tipping point, which is a phrase by the sociologist Detlef Pollack from 2022, has been reached because more than 50% of citizens are not members of the two main Christian churches in Germany, which is, I think, interesting background. With regard to the number of people, of Catholics in Germany who have a migration background, I don't have any current numbers. I can just tell you that in the year 2015, almost 1 in 5 Catholics in Germany grew up speaking a language other than German as their mother tongue. But these are the newest numbers I have here. Another thing I want to draw your attention to is the electoral behavior of Catholics in the United States and in Germany. I'll start by looking at the United States. Here, Catholics are sometimes identified as a major swing voting group in American politics. Overall, you can say that since the 1970s, they supported the Republican candidates more than the Democratic candidates, with some exceptions. But as you can see in the graphic from the Pew Research Center that I put in my slides, it's not a clear, it's not like it's a uniform group that is deciding to follow one party over the other, or to vote for one party over the other. And I think that is quite obvious here. We have the last 3 elections, 2016, 2020, and 2024. And you can see there's a remarkable increase of voters for Trump in the last election, also remarkable with regard to Hispanic Catholics who have not been in favor of, who are still, like the majority is still not voted, has still not voted for Trump in the last election, but the numbers are increasing. The next slide I have here is on the German electoral behavior. Unfortunately, the graphic that I put here is in German, but I will translate it. On the upper left, you can see the results of the election if only Protestants had voted. It's the Bundestagswahl 2025, which is the last election that we had in Germany in the beginning of the year. If only Protestants had participated in the election, 29% of them had voted. The results would have been 29% for the CDU, 20% for the SPD, 20% for the AfD, the right-wing party, which is interesting. If you look on the right, you see the results for Catholics. You see that 39% of Catholics voted for the CDU. Only, it's still a lot, but only 18% for the AfD, and the Social Democrats were the third option for Catholics. So this is just, to give you a quick impression on, and it's of course only a superficial insight into the fact that Catholic make up not only a significant proportion of the population, but that Catholic voters have an influence on the election results. And it's also, like I said, interesting to see that while the numbers in Germany of Catholics are declining, the numbers of Catholics in the US have been slightly increasing. So why choosing to do a transnational comparison between the German and the US Catholics? There is obviously a difference in migration history in the United States and in Germany, and I really don't want to get into that now. I just want to point to the fact that while in the United States, most immigration is Christian immigration, and Catholic immigration is an important factor to that. In Germany, that's not the case. So you could say this, it's a completely different situation, since to Germany, mostly people from primarily Muslim countries are emigrating to. And you could also point out that this political situation in Germany and the United States is of course different, but I still think that it does make sense to look at them, because the Church and Catholics have historically been important players in refugee aid and in immigration in both countries. And that is interesting because they have historically found themselves positioned between the universal claims of the Church and the particular demands of the nation state. So they were navigating an allegiance that often required balancing transnational religious identity with emerging forms of national political belonging, because the head of the Catholic Church is the Pope, and it's, as you know, obviously not a national character, but a transnational one. That is the same for German Catholics as it is for US Catholics. And then just to, hint at that, there were periods in history in both the United States and the Federal Republic of Germany, or more its predecessing political systems, where Catholics were particularly estranged from their country's leadership. In Germany, there's the Kulturkampf, for example. And from a historical perspective, since the 1850s, the majority of the laborers and families arriving in the United States were Catholic. And they often arrived in desperate need of welfare, of assistance, and of ministry. And the Church in the United States met those needs, or tried to meet those needs at the ground level. So they have a very elaborated system of migration relief services. But also in Germany, the Catholic Church has been, or is, an important stakeholder in the support of migrants, always in this balancing these balancing the Church nation state relation. So what is, other than the Pope, unifying Catholics in the United States and in Germany is a same set of principles, despite having different, of course, also theological and religious histories and different histories of migration. And the unifying, or the common ground that they all share would be Catholic social teaching, which is important in my research because it serves as kind of a background according to which both actors in both countries are defending or arguing when they talk about migration. So what is Catholic social teaching? It refers to the entirety of statements made by the Roman Catholic Church concerning the realm of human social life. In the narrower sense, Catholic social teaching is a product of the 19th century, so it's not even that old. It comes from the times of the Industrial Revolution and the great social tensions and the different political systems that were discussed then. And I just wanted to point out that the first encyclical that is considered a social encyclical has been Rerum Novarum from 1891 by Leo XIII, which is, as you might know, the name predecessor of Leo XIV, who has become the Pope in spring. I just wanted to put other encyclicals just to show you how diverse Catholic social teaching is. And I wanted to quickly point out that there are some key principles, but there's no official canon of principles. But most sources, most theologians, most people in the clergy will probably mention principles such as human dignity, subsidiarity, solidarity, and the common good, and also charity as principles that Catholics are supposed to follow when they are in every area that is concerning their social life, really. So not only concerning migration, but also other areas as well. By the choice of pictures, I already wanted to hint at an important global development of the last year. Here you have a picture of Pope Francis and a picture of Pope Leo, and it was really hard to pick debates and developments in 2025 because while the tendencies in migration policy are similar, they are also very, like, as you can probably imagine, the state of discourse is quite different in the two countries. But since I'm in the United States at the moment, and since my research here is focusing on the situation here, I will also mainly focus on the developments here. And this can also be another reason for that is that the debates here in the United States are influential for German debates, but not vice versa, at least for Catholicism. So ever since the inauguration of President Trump in January, there has been an ongoing dispute concerning immigration between the government and Catholic actors in the United States. And I'm just outlining some milestones here, and I will end in the very present with my short outlining in the last week. In January, there were a lot of Catholic bishops started to criticize some executive orders. For example, Bishop Broglio, the then president of the USCCB, of the United States Bishop Conference, said that some of the executive orders were deeply concerning, especially those that are focused on the treatment of immigrants and refugees. Following this, also Catholic charities, because of the cuts in US aid, Catholic charities didn't receive funding anymore, didn't receive a lot of their funding anymore, which then led in April, because there are contracts between the United States and the United States Bishop Conference that are concerning the federal funding aids for Catholic charities for migration. Essentially the program started to phase out, and the USCCB then terminated them and formally ended the federal government partnership following the funding cuts. At the same time, and I'm just only drawing attention here to major developments, there are many local protests, prayer vigils, and demonstrations for detainees, for individuals who have been under, who have been captured by ICE. And remarkably, in the church, there was a change of leadership. So now going from the United States level to a more global level that is influencing the United States, of course. In May, Pope Leo became Pope, and while Pope Francis has been very, very outspoken about immigration issues, and he wrote a letter, for example, which I will quote from in a few minutes. He wrote a letter to the USCCB. In the beginning, Pope Leo was quite, well, he was not very outspoken about migration issues, but in the last few months, there were a few statements where he was drawing more attention to the issue, and where he was asking the bishops in the United States to come up with a statement. And on November 12th, so only a few days ago, there was the election of the new leader of the United States Bishop Conference. And in this meeting, the bishops agreed on a special message. There was a vote, and 216 of the bishops were in favor, 5 were against it, 3 abstentions. That's important to mention because you needed 2/3 majority to pass such a special message. And just to give you an idea how remarkable this message is, it marked the first time in 12 years that the USCCB invoked this particularly urgent way of speaking as a body of bishops. So the special message is like a message from the body of bishops and not from the leader, not from a group of individuals within the bishop group, but it was the last one issued since 2013, which was a response to the federal government's and Obama's contraceptive mandate. So also a change of topics, because you can see that in the last few years, the Bishop Conference politically was very concerned about abortion issues and contraception, etc. And the last message where the body was speaking as like a unity was from 2003, just to give you a bit of the history. And then because it's so recent, I thought it might make sense to focus on that a bit more. The statement, the special statement from November 12th, condemned the vilification of migrants. It has a lot of focus on family reunification, but it also is contains a demand that it's important to reform the immigration system. And so overall, just as a quick, it's not a progressive statement in that sense. It's but it's of course drawing attention to the issue. So the 2 points that I'm going to mention for Germany for the last year are a bit more they're in a way smaller, but it also shows how different the debate is, but then in a way maybe also similar. The first point that I want to talk about is the Influx Limitation Act, the Zustrombegrenzungsgesetz, which was a legislative initiative by the CDU shortly before the elections in the beginning of the year. It was essentially a reaction to the terrorist attacks in Solingen, Magdeburg, and Aschaffenburg, and it was supposed to propose different measures to tighten immigration laws. It was controversial from the beginning on, because by putting forward the initiative, it was clear that the AfD would be voting in favor of that. And especially in the month leading up to the election, but also after that, there was a lot, like there was a huge debate about the firewall against the AfD. So you can see that immigration issues and also the way that the church is taking position, or that Catholics are taking positions within the debate in Germany, is very much related to a position against the AfD, essentially. As an answer, there were, of course, a lot of outcries in the public, but also a very prominently featured statement by the Protestant Church in Germany, the EKD, and by the German Bishop Conference, which is in short the DBK. And they essentially said that way they think, the statement is about why they think this will not, this legislative approach will not be a way to prevent terrorist attacks. So it's focusing on migration, and it's also putting forward, for example, family reunification, which is also something that the United States bishops are focusing on. But it's rather technical. It's engaging directly with a legislative proposal, which you, like, for example, if you compare it to the statement of the U.S. bishops, it's quite different in that way. And the statement then was followed by some Catholic bishops distancing themselves from it, because they said that it wasn't made in their name. There was one of the arguments was that they didn't want to interfere with the election process, and so it was it gained even more attention, because on the one hand, the opposition politicians were, of course, using it to strengthen their argumentation against the CDU, which, you know, the C in the CDU stands for Christian. So it was, of course, an obvious choice to use that argument against them, and also the Central Committee of German Catholics, the ZDK, which is the biggest lay organization of Catholics in Germany. Lay organization means these are people who are not in the clergy, which also, like, which has, or used to have, it's a complicated perhaps at the moment, very strong ties to the CDU. And they even, like, chose even stronger words to distance themselves from the legislative approach of the CDU, which then they said that it's against human dignity, for example, which then led Annegret Kramp-Karrenbauer, who is a very prominent CDU politician, to leave the committee, which was an interesting sign. Is there a rift between CDU and Catholics? But, you know, general claims about these are really, really difficult, because as I showed you earlier, the election voting behavior still showed that 40%, almost 40% of German Catholics voted for the CDU afterwards. So it might not have made such a big influence. Then, lastly, I want to draw attention to a debate which was also, like, not on the same level as the Influx Limitation Act, and of course not on the same level as the debates we have here in the United States, is the cityscape remark, the Stadtbild debate that Chancellor Friedrich Merz opened in October. He said that while he was talking about efforts to to fight against the AfD, essentially. He said, but we still have this problem in the cityscape, and that is why the interior minister is working to carry out large-scale deportation. And that was by the German public, or by many voices in the German public. This was, and of course by the opposition, that was commented to be a racist statement, and also some bishops, some local pastors, charity organizations were trying to, were essentially saying that these are racist statements, and that this is a language that is not really putting us in like a good position, where, like, that this is not language that is supposed to be used in the migration debate. So now I'm coming to some key issues, or key talking points that, when I'm talking to people here, when I talk to people in Germany, that are often coming up with reference to present migration debates. The first issue that I want to, these are two examples that I chose. Is concerning the question, what does the church actually teach about migration? How can we talk about Catholic social teaching today, basically? And there are two motives that are occurring repeatedly. The first is the order of love, the Ordo Amoris, and the second is about abortion versus Catholic social teaching. And another question, and that people are talking about a lot, is how politically involved should the church be? This is probably the Ordo Amoris is probably now something that most people have made some kind of contact with, because it was quite prominent in the media in the beginning of the year, because it's a concept from Christian theology, which was invoked by J.D. Vance to defend the Trump administration's immigration policy, which is Augustinian essentially, and it's about the way that, or it was Vance's way of defending the Trump administration's immigration policy. And it's an example, that's why I chose it, even though it's kind of old now. It's an example of a transnational Catholic debate. And I want to start by pointing out, well, the order of love is like, or what the argument, not what the order of love actually is, but what it was made into is a debate about whether you should first attend to your closest neighbor, which would then, or according to J.D. Vance, be your the neighbor in your, like, your national neighbor, and then immigrants are further down in the hierarchy. And yes, and I wanted to point out that this is the debate that it's been going on before J.D. Vance was referring to it even. So Cody Cooper wrote on Word on Fire, which is a very influential Catholic blog. The Order of Charity supports hardening the border first. Then it is entirely reasonable to discuss how to balance our responsibilities towards migrants. Here are the words of J.D. Vance, how he explained that he uses this concept. He said, as an American leader, but also as an American citizen, your compassion belongs to your fellow citizens. That doesn't mean you hate people from outside of your own borders, but there's this old school concept, and I think it's a very Christian concept, by the way, that you love your family, and then you love your neighbor, and then you love your community, and then you love your fellow citizens in your own country. And then after that, you can focus and prioritize the rest of the world. which was then, that's why I'm also drawing attention to it. The first thing that makes it transnational is that Pope Francis also picked up on that statement and said that Christian love is not a concentric expansion of interests that little by little extend to other persons and groups. So he's refuting this figure of like using this concept in migration discourses. And just to show you, in Germany, this is not that much been a political debate, but there has been like a theological debate on the order of love and whether it can be applied in immigration policy. For example, by Ludger Schwienhorst-Schönberger, who said, I translated that from the German, of course, the concept of ordered love can be used in the context of migration policy. According to Christian understanding, it even must be. So this is an example of a motive where I now put some famous or some public quotes, but which I also encountered in conversations. And the second is, which I also find really interesting, but this is solely a US debate, is abortion and Catholic social teaching. So, and this can go in two directions. This can go in more of a immigration critical direction, and this can go in more progressive direction. So, for example, also on the same blog, it says it's always illicit to procure a direct elective abortion, for instance, but the principle of solidarity does not entail a precise marginal tax rate. It just doesn't work that way. So what it says here essentially is that Catholic social teaching is something entirely different from, for example, abortion, which has been ruling like the Catholic political discourse for years. And what many Catholics are saying is many more of the conservative Catholics are saying is we cannot compare these two discourses. Abortion is a dogma. Catholic social teaching is a loose set of principles, and we have to look at the way that it's applied in a concrete political situation. And then there's Pope Leo, who in his first public statements on immigration in the United States says, someone who says, I'm against abortion, but says I'm in favor of the death penalty is not really pro-life. So someone who says that I'm against abortion, but I'm in agreement with the inhuman treatment of immigrants who are in the United States, I don't know if that's pro-life. So he is, on the other hand, directly comparing pro-life or the pro-life debate with the immigration debate and turning it into something else. And just really, really quickly, I want to draw attention to another debate, which is old, like the way that the church or the way that Catholics should engage in day-to-day politics versus the call to action. You could see like there are a lot of differences in different Catholic groups in the United States and in Germany. For example, there was the president of the German parliament, Julia Klöckner. She referred in the last few months, she often mentioned that churches are behaving like NGOs, and they should, go back to preaching and to talking about the end and the beginning of life, and not concern themselves with everyday politics. She's a CDU politician, and you can also find these figure of speech in US Catholics. And then there's an interesting tendency, which I also just wanted to draw attention to, in the National Survey of Priests, which was conducted by the Catholic University. They found out that younger generation priests tend to be focusing, like when they are ordering their priorities or things that the church should be focusing on, they not like unlike the older generation who said social justice issues are top priorities. They say liturgy and evangelization are top priority of the church. So there is a generational shift there with regard to social justice and Catholic social teaching and immigration issues. And just quickly, but maybe we can talk about that more in the discussion. I just wanted to point out that the discourse at the moment is, I think, a lot about reassurance, about positions that are referring to Catholic social teaching and to Catholic tradition, but it's a discourse that is happening between unity and fragmentation. I mean, it's really remarkable that the United States Bishop Conference put together a unifying statement. In Germany, it was not possible to do that, at least not in the beginning of the year, which might be because of the political situation back then. But they are like, with the new political changes in Germany and of course in the United States, they're trying to redefine their role within the nation state, especially for German Catholics. Their debates are always framed by by people saying, "Are you still relevant? Do you still have a relevant voice?" So there's a lot of concern about that. And the last thing that I wanted to draw attention to is that there's a struggle for differentiation and for language in both, that you can see in both churches. So there is, as you can see, like there are of course different groups, but the main position is not open the borders or close the borders, and there's in a like heated political climate, there's the attempt and the focus on trying to be to find a way to reframe the debate in one's own words and concepts. And by that, I want to finish my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was a very, very rich and informative presentation. All right, so for all of our participants, I wanted to let you know that if you have any questions, we have about 15 minutes for questions. If you could please type them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then that way I can collect and get the questions to Kathrin. And I see that we already have 2 questions in there. So the first one has to do with the resolution on November 12th. And the question is, did Pope Leo directly advise the US bishops regarding that resolution?
It wasn't like he wrote them a letter and said, you should make a statement. That was in the context of a visit by Bishop Seitz with a group of to the Pope, and with a group of U.S. immigrants, and they were talking about the situation in the United States, and there was press present, and the Pope was very concerned about the situation in the United States, and it was then that he said that he hoped that, and that is what we know because also Bishop Seitz reported it like that, that there would be a message from the Bishop Conference. So something in between, like it's not like he told them you have to say something now, but I think it's implied that he wished that there was a statement.
Excellent. All right. Now the second question is, so you mentioned the concept of subsidiarity. While important philosophically to Catholicism, can you give some practical examples of how this concept plays out in the question of the Catholic reaction to immigration in the US and Germany?
Okay. That's actually subsidiarity. It's actually something that is not really I mean, it's important. It's an important principle in Catholic social teaching, but I think I would need to think about that for a minute, because the way I've in the interviews that I had, there was actually not really that much reference to that. So I mean,
while you consider a response, perhaps for those of us that are not as steeped in Catholic social teaching, you could explain just a little bit more what subsidiarity actually means.
So subsidiarity means that it's a principle of social organization, that social and political issues should be handled at the most immediate or local level possible, rather than a centralized authority. So rather that like Pope Leo has to, like, do all the work of the president. There are smaller organizations that are focusing on the issue, and a higher level body, so this is the idea of subsidiarity, should only intervene when a lower level body is unable to solve the problem on its own. So it prioritizes local control and over centralized power, which was also a central issue for Pope Francis in general, in like restructuring Catholicism. And perhaps when thinking about Catholic social teaching and how it's implemented, I mean, the funds for most of the charity programs are, of course, from the federal government, but then there are these smaller organizations that are handling the issue. And I think this is still something, even with all the changes and with the funds that are now lost, the federal funds that the Catholic Church does not have anymore to support migration service, there are still these efforts to educate, especially like this on the level of the smaller congregations, to educate Catholics in the way that they can support migrants, even though like the higher support that is needed for that kind of support is no longer there at the moment.
So I think this is extremely fascinating and might be one of the more interesting findings that comes out of your research. So let me ask the question, actually a version of both of the questions we got, a little bit more provocatively for a second. So, I mean, you made it really clear that this resolution on November 12th was really kind of like an exceptional big deal, because there hadn't been one that garnered 2/3 support from the Conference of Catholic Bishops since 2003, I think you said, right? Or it's been 12 years, it's been a long time, right? So could one say that the fact that they felt compelled to make this resolution showed that subsidiarity is not working, meaning that at the parish level or at the lower level within the church, that there was a how would I put it, a lack of action or a lack of unified action, so that they had to kind of swoop in to provide direction?
That's an interesting idea. I don't think so. I think this was more. I need to talk. I need to think about it for a minute, but I think it's more motivated in like direct opposition to some of the orders of the Trump administration. Like I said, like basically they are still saying that the system is broken, but I think that the church was for the last few months in a very, very difficult situation, because on the one hand you have the administration that is cutting their funds and essentially causing most of the programs to cease existing, that are the migration aid programs that the Catholic Church has. And then the administration also sometimes more, sometimes less provocative, sometimes people were talking about taking away the NGO state of the church, and then and so it's really difficult, like for these pragmatic political strategic reasons to put into to put out such a statement. But then on the other hand, like I said, there are almost 30% immigrants who are 30% of the Catholics are immigrants. So you also have there's also the chance and the risk of losing a whole generation by not replying to current political issues. And so, like, I don't know, maybe it was also a way of motivating the lower the whole church. I think in a way it is, but I don't think it was the primary motive in putting out the statement.
So I will admit that I was going somewhere with this line of questioning, okay. And it actually dovetails with the question that I see here in the chat, and that is, one of the more interesting statistics that you presented early on was support of Catholics for various candidates in the 2024 presidential election. And if I recall, white Catholics supported Trump by 25 points, and Hispanic Catholics supported Harris by 17 points, which was down from 35 points for Biden back in 2020, but it's still, like, that is a massive cleavage, within the faithful, if white Catholics and Hispanic Catholics are diverging so much. So what's your explanation for that? And and what are the implications for the church going forward?
Well, one of the very obvious explanation for that is probably that from the almost 30% of Catholics who are migrants, there are more Hispanic Catholics than there are white Catholics, and so I guess they are interested in different political issues, so they are more inclined to voting for Democrats. But it's still very, very interesting that that so many chose to vote for Trump in this election. I mean, I think some, like, I'm no expert on that, but I think there are some studies on how Harris, being a woman, has perhaps been an influence in voting choice in the last election for some electoral groups. And what I find really interesting is how you, like, connecting that to the last question and trying to think what this means for the statement as a whole. And I think one of the answers is that it was a very, like, it's very interesting if you look at the recent media discourse in the Catholic Church. So the last few months, it was like Catholics are a very progressive religion, and they are supporting migrants and immigration, and if you look at the media coverage of the of Catholic Church from the last few years, you see how they are getting more and more conservative, focusing on abortion and everything, and I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. Like, the Catholics, even though there is this statement came out, and even though some of the bishops that are more known for supporting Trump and that are, for example, in the religious faith committee that he made, are also distancing themselves quite a bit, at least, and say that the immigration orders are not Catholic, essentially. They are not, like, progressive on migration issues. And I think this is essentially what we can learn from the data of the electoral vote, and then also when looking at the statement.
All right, well, we are rapidly coming to full time, but I think we do have time for another question. And that is, the Catholic Church in the US is the largest service provider for migrants after the government. How involved are the Catholic and Protestant organizations in actually working with migrants on the ground? And also, what is the situation in Germany?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think at the moment everything is like they're trying to find like a new order, because like I said, that most funding to Catholic charities in the United States has been cut. For example, the Migration Relief Service, which belongs directly to the USCCB, has laid off 100 of workers. And so also their work has been changing, of course, and the work of the and so it's really hard to, like, at the moment give you like a concrete answer to that, because they're finding some issues that they are concentrating on. One issue would be the religious worker visa, which is perhaps also an example of like that maybe the mainline Catholic Church is not that progressive, because I mean, yeah, well, I take that back, but it's I mean, you could focus on different issues. It's of course also an important issue, and then there are these very local initiatives. For example, I think over the weekend I read about an immigrant from New Jersey who was detained, where the Catholic Church was involved. And there are lots of local initiatives, and I think this local work is becoming more and more important as the resources are not there anymore to support the big programs. In Germany, there are also the big charity organizations, for example, the Diakonie and the Caritas, the Diakonie, the Diaconia, which would be the main Protestant charity organization, and then the Caritas, the main Catholic charity organization, that are providing refugee aid in Germany and also in other countries over the world. And but there's not that much money going into the immigration system in Germany. And there are also local initiatives, for example, but it's not as institutionalized, I would say. Just, it's not my expertise, but I would say it's not as institutionalized as in the US.
All right, well, maybe we do have time for this final question, and that is that, as you mentioned, Pope Leo had a pro-life argument, stating that a coherent pro-life position cannot be limited to questions of reproductive justice or abortion, but entails certain responses to issues like the death penalty and immigration. So how do you think that is being received? What kind of impact is that having?
The pro-life argument of Pope Leo, right? Yeah. So, I mean, I think there was like this argument, which was, I mean, I think in the way it is used now, and that's also why I used it that way, but it's strictly speaking, it's not right. It's put a bit out of context, because he said that in a very specific context where a political leader was supposed to get a medal, but for efforts in immigration, but he had like a more negative stance on, or a stance that is not agreeing with the church on abortion, and that's and that's the debate where the phrase from Pope Leo is from, but it was of course, taken out of context and quoted and taken up by the progressives who suddenly had like a statement from the Pope that was fitting into their line of the story. But in general, I mean, pro-life, with like, if you look at the numbers, you can see that especially those Catholics in the United States and also in Germany, where I would say it's not that much, like not such an issue, like a political issue, or not like such a widely argumented issue. If you look at the general public, especially those who don't go to mass that often, don't really agree with the stance of the church on pro-life. So I mean, so I would say that it's about pro-life is, for the majority of Catholics in both states, is probably not a unique selling point, to put it that way. But I mean, it's still a remarkable statement.
All right, well, we have come to time. So Kathrin, thank you so much for sharing your research with us. Thank you to all of our attendees for taking the time to be with us. And I would just mention to everybody that we have a variety of other webinars from our DAAD AGI Fellows that are going to be coming up in the next couple of weeks. So please stay tuned, and we hope to see you again. Thank you. Bye-bye.